Hey, good morning. It is Wednesday, I believe. What? Yes, Wednesday, August 12th, about 9 a.m. It's a little later. Good morning, but still a morning walk. After I got my chores done, I had a few things to do. Now I'm out for my morning walk, and then I will get back as soon as I can to work again. It's a cooler day today. Just take a look at the vista that we have here. Birds are chirping. You can see the birds are in the trees. I don't know if you can see that over there. And chirping away. It feels like they're having a conference. Probably about when they want to decide to fly south for the winter. Of course I don't know. I don't speak bird. But that's a little different sound than what I'm used to hearing. But it also could be because I'm not here this early. Now they're flying from that tree over to another tree, which is interesting. Maybe because of me, I don't know. It's a cooler day. It's 66 degrees Fahrenheit right now, and it's supposed to get to 79 today, which is a little on the warmer side, but not terribly warm. Still technically in the 70s. So it's kind of a, I don't know, a sign that fall is on its way. And I have to say, I'm kind of looking forward to fall this year. I think, I love all the seasons, I mean, in their own way. Even winter has its own personality, quiet. I mean, winter is more quiet, right, than any other season. Like right now, there's the chittering of bugs. I can hear the birds and so much activity, right? Just life, it abounds and has that energy that's there, that gets born again in the spring, passes away in the fall, comes back again the next year. But winter is like that transition period. It's like the quietness between the two busy seasons. But man, this has been a great summer, and I've enjoyed it tremendously. And maybe a little more so this year because of making these videos, which has, I think, even raised my awareness. Making these videos has helped me to verbalize or vocalize, I think, what I've already been doing. But I think it does help me to even sustain that awareness maybe a little longer than normal. While I'm talking, I'm observing, and I'm sort of explaining what I'm seeing in the mind as well as seeing out here. And there's a certain quality to that there's a joy to that. There is a joy in communicating. There's a joy in if you see something beautiful, describing it to somebody, or telling somebody, hey, there's something beautiful here, pay attention to it. And that's what I feel like I'm doing. I can't describe the beautiful thing that I see, but I can say there is this beautiful thing. And if you pay attention yourself on your own, you may see it, right? You may observe it, not in any conventional way, but in some other way, which is the way of beauty. When one almost forgets oneself. And the immensity of nature is very conducive to forgetting oneself. When you walk outside and you just see like how beautiful and expansive everything is, and you realize this is only scratching the surface, of what's out there. Like, so much more is out there, but I'm seeing a lot of it, and it just reminds you of your place, that you are not the center of the universe. You may think you are. Your idea of the universe may be that is the case, but not when you come out here and you see all the living things, from the grass, the tiniest insect that I can't even see, to the birds and the deer. Whatever. so many different species of animals that are out here, all doing their thing. And it just reminds you, right, that you have a place. You have a place in all this, but your place is not the supreme importance of everything. You know, it's balanced with everything else. Your place is not any more important than anybody else's place, or even your place in nature. And I'm sure we forget that most of the time, because when we're self-centered, and that's what self-centered is, when you sort of feel that you're more important than everybody else or every other thing. And to see that is also to do something about it. The first step to anything is to be aware of that. Which reminds me, actually, I talked about Helen Keller yesterday. I looked her up a little. I want to just read something that I thought was really interesting, because I guess I knew of her. I don't, like a lot of things, I have sort of superficial knowledge of things, and then I go look it up and I find there's more to it that I didn't know. I didn't know she wrote like 14 books, something like that. She was deaf and blind. She did see and hear up to 19 months old. So that's interesting, because she at least had exposure to that. There was some part of her brain that had already received all that input, and maybe hadn't been completely formed, but it was already there somewhat. It would be interesting, and I haven't done this, but to research, like, there are people that are born blind and deaf, and is it any different for them? When they come to grow and learn and, be alive, like, what is their life like compared to, say, Helen Keller, who became, she became an author, a political activist. She was one of the founders of the ACLU. I guess I didn't realize that. She went to school. And she learned all this from Anne Sullivan, who, I believe when she was 7 years old, when Helen Keller was 7 years old, and I think Anne Sullivan was 20, was when they got introduced. And I think in their later years they became companions, partners, but at that point I think it was just a professional thing. Somehow she got introduced to her. But it was very interesting that how she learned language. I'm scrolling through the Wikipedia page here just to see. I guess it was her mother, Keller's mother, who reached out, consulted a physician, who then put her in contact with actually Alexander Graham Bell, who was working with deaf children at the time. I guess that's something I didn't know, or it sounds a little familiar. Then, it explains sort of the convoluted process of getting to Anne Sullivan, who was 20 years old at that time, and that she arrived at her house in 1887 and immediately began to teach her to communicate by signing words in her hand. And that's what I remember. I think my knowledge here might be like watching an old movie on Helen Keller or something we saw in school, where she would make different signs in Helen Keller's hand, and then pour water on her hand, like while she was signing the word water. And at some point, right, she was very frustrated at first because none of this was making any sense. She was mimicking the hand gestures at first without really understanding. And the reason we know this, she wrote a book called The Story of My Life, Helen Keller did. And I would like to get that book, I think, and read it and see what she has to say, because it's just fascinating. And in the book, she wrote about the moment that it clicked for her. Now, this is insight, by the way, right? When one has an insight, it just clicks, right? You go from before the insight to after the insight, and something very interesting happens. And also, it's interesting, she uses the word attention and freedom in this paragraph, and these are all things we've talked about, and I don't think it's coincidental that these things are all related. But this is a quote where she recalled that moment that she had the insight that the signing of the letters in her hand was related to what she was feeling at that time, which was the water, right? And imagine there's a point when that connection is not there, and then all of a sudden, it is. She made that connection. So she said, I stood still, my whole attention fixed upon the motion of her fingers. Suddenly, I felt a misty consciousness, as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought, and somehow the mystery of language was revealed to me. I knew then that water meant the wonderful, cool something that was flowing over my hand. The living word awakened my soul, gave it light, hope, and set it free. And I just thought that was really interesting, because I had never read this book and I hadn't encountered it. But when I read that and I saw so much truth in there, one, this is a description of insight, right? Something that comes in a flash, where a connection is made or something is revealed that was not known before, right? And you could say there were causes for it, that, in this case, she was, exposing her to this. But what shifted from, she had water pouring over her hand, she had symbols, signs, in her palm. But then but she said her whole attention was on this, right? And we talked about how attention is how you learn. Paying attention is how you learn from the world. We must pay attention to learn anything, right? So the attention is what I've been saying over and over again, and it's clearly obvious, right, that you can't learn anything unless you pay attention. And to pay attention, there must be a silence also, because if your head is filled with distracting thoughts, you're not paying attention. So part of paying attention means to be silent, to be aware. And so she was aware, right? She didn't have a lot of choice in her world. It was filled mostly with silence. But she was paying attention to what was happening through her senses. Her sense of touch, right here, was all she had. She couldn't see, she couldn't hear, but she could feel, and that was her awareness of the world. We talked a lot about awareness yesterday, was through touch. Imagine if she didn't even have touch. I think every one of us has done this at some point, has tried to put herself in that situation and say, what if I couldn't see anything, hear anything? At least she could touch, right? What if you couldn't touch anything? Who would you be? We can't imagine that, right? Because it's thought trying to imagine something that we don't know and we'll never know. Not this being, that I am. We'll never know that. But you can imagine, you can just sort of imagine, which is image making, which is thought coming into play. But with no sensory input, like, you would have very little awareness in the conventional sense. There'd be some sort of awareness, right, of the mind itself, I think, right? Because the mind, we can have mind awareness. We know that from dreaming, right? When you dream, you're sort of pulling from your memory, which is in your mind, and you are aware of the mind at that point. The mind becomes almost like a sense organ and is aware of itself in that way. But it's always aware of images, things that you received from the outside world. What if you had never stored those images? You never had memories, right? Memories come from our senses. Our brain is connected to our sense organs. So most of our memories are stored sensory experiences. So it really does make you wonder, what would you remember if you never had any sensory experiences? It'd be a great emptiness, for sure, right? That we could say. I don't think anyone knows what that would be like that hasn't gone through that. But Helen Keller did go through that, right? She, not fully, she had touch, like we said. So she had touch awareness, touch consciousness. And through that sensory pathway, was able to open herself to this world, to communicate. And it's an amazing story. I hope this story of Helen Keller goes on to be told and retold for centuries to come. There's many other Helen Kellers out there now, though, right? Like, I learned about this when I was growing up in the 70s, and you know, it was a big story then, but it was also, my world was very small. Now the world is expansive with social media. I can't only imagine there are thousands of stories of people like this, probably more, maybe more severe, maybe less severe. I don't know. It's not something I've researched, and I'm probably not likely to research it, because beyond a certain point, it's a curiosity, right? People do live this way, and I'm glad that they find ways to overcome their difficulties. But we can't focus on other people. We have to see the world the way we see it, pay attention in our own way to see what we can learn. And I think this is the important lesson here, if there is a lesson, which is she gained this connection by paying attention to what was happening to her through her senses. And insight arose in that process. It was not caused by the process. I mean, the conditions were there, right? But the conditions were there before the insight, and then the same conditions were there after the insight. How insight occurred at that particular point in time to make the connection is a mystery, right? It is a mystery how that happens, how that works. But it happened, right? And it awakened her, right, to another state of awareness, another state of consciousness now, where these other patterns of language came into be. She wasn't completely languageless. I think they called them house signs. She had 20 house signs before, and I don't know what that could be, just signs for, like, I didn't look this up to see what it is, but I'm guessing it's just different gestures, like maybe pointing at your mouth to mean food or something, right? I'm guessing, but it could be something like that, like not language in letters, words, but in just symbolic associations between gross body movements maybe and objects, right? A limited vocabulary. Probably very similar to what humans were like before we had language, before there was language, right? There was some symbolism, which, by the way, I was fascinated to learn yesterday that human beings, the Stone Age, right, which can be broken up into what is the Paleolithic and the Neolithic period, lasted 3 million years. And I think I might have known this, but like sometimes things don't register with me. Like, it's knowledge, but again, it's like knowledge, but it's not hitting deeply. And 3 million years that human beings have been using tools. And what's interesting is that means the majority of time, the later ages that came, the Bronze Age, I don't know, Copper Age, Iron Age, these different ages, right, that these epochs, which I believe are the Bronze and Iron, but I'm not sure the other two ages, which I was also learning a little bit about how that came to be, these designation of ages. But what they said is those have been so short. Like the period of time that we currently live, where you learn to work with metals. And it's interesting that they divide the epoch of humanity up in this way, right? You could divide it up into many ways, but in this particular way, based off of what were their tools made out of. Were their tools made out of stone, bronze, iron? You know, and as knowledge progressed, these different technologies advanced. And now think of how rapid our advances are now. I mean, there were tens of thousands of years that, and I think they said the Stone Age was from like somewhere around 3 million years ago up to maybe 10,000 years ago, right? So maybe 10,000 years ago, human beings started to learn metalworking. Of course, these are all proximate periods of time, which changed a lot, right? Metals also, what's interesting, metals allowed us to create weapons of a new kind that we didn't have before, like swords and all that. And when you think of that must have reshaped the human mind and altered its evolutionary course. What it also tells you, though, is for some 3 million years, humanity lived on this planet probably relatively peaceful, I would say, in small groups. I think they said small groups. Communities weren't really, cities weren't really there. Hunter-gatherers, simple tools in harmony with nature. Not to say, I'm sure there was violence, but not to the same degree probably, because we wouldn't have lasted that long if there had been. If you think about it, we wouldn't have survived if we hadn't been relatively peaceful over that period of time where humanity was probably very small. I don't know what the population was. I'll have to go look at that. See, when there were very few people on this planet using stone tools, right? So, arrowheads, right, count as stone tools. You can make knives out of stone tools, but most of this was done for making clothes, for, I think a lot of the Native Americans, right, and I haven't looked this up, but I believe they were sort of still in the Stone Age in that regard. The tools they mostly made came directly from nature, from stone, wood, that sort of thing. But I think what's interesting is we lasted a long time like that, right? Humanity survived on this planet and sure had its troubles, but we weren't on the verge of destroying ourselves. Like, we managed to get along. We were more in harmony with nature. We had to be in harmony with nature. We wouldn't have lasted that long. Now we're within hundreds of years. Things are changing so rapidly that, and not in a good direction, I would say, because so much of this we can just see using our intelligence is leading us towards the brink of disaster. That if something doesn't change, if something doesn't shift, we're going to continue on this self-destructive, self-centered path to our own destruction. Not just individually, but as a society and perhaps the planet itself. The knowledge we've gained, when you think about it, it's from the accumulation of knowledge, right? We gained this knowledge of metalworking, and then it's almost like it took off from there, right? We started saying, hey, this is something new we didn't know before, and knowledge, that part of the brain of acquiring knowledge, probably was strengthened. I can only conjecture. I mean, I'm sure many people have researched this. I don't claim to be an expert in any of this, so this is just me exploring myself, really, in a lot of ways, and just imagining how it might apply to history. But we're rapidly accelerating our decline now. But nature's still around us, right? This is the nature of the Stone Age. Like the trees, the plants, they may be slightly different, but that part of this world is less altered, right? I'm sure human activity had something to do with selecting certain plants and animals, for sure. I mean, nature is not the same, but for most of that period of time, we didn't influence nature like that. We were living in nature, but not altering nature to the vast extent that we are now, on the scale that we're doing it. And now it's like there's no part of this planet that's safe from us, right? Everything is feeling our influence. We're doing things to affect the entire planet, to change the atmosphere, to the waters are being polluted with our waste, and the planet's becoming hotter due to human activity. Like, these are facts, right? These are facts that are occurring that we can see, right? That's what's happening. We may have different explanations for these facts, but like the Earth is warming. That's clearly happening, right? Based on measurements that are being taken. Some people try to say that's due to natural cycles. Most people that study this would agree it's due to human activity, because there's causal relationships that can explain it. That's why, right? In this case, we're not just observing, we are also attempting to find explanations for these things that are happening. And we can tie them to human activity and come up with reasonable arguments why human beings are altering the environment. It's very reasonable. It's something that we should be concerned about. Very much so. I've never understood how people cannot be concerned about that. I never understood it. Like, I don't understand how you must be so disconnected from nature, so disconnected from this natural world, to not be concerned about what could be affecting the natural world. And I remember having some discussions with people in the past where I would say, let's just say have you considered even the possibility, right? That let's just assume there's two possibilities. One is this is a natural cycle, not caused by human activity. The other, allow the possibility to be there that we are affecting the environment. Like some people, they won't even allow that to enter into their consciousness. It's removed. Because then what I would say is, what's the consequence of that? Right? What's the consequence? We have to be aware of that. So, so I guess what I'm saying is that it's amazing to me that some people won't even consider what's right in front of them. And if human activity is affecting the natural world in such a way that it could destroy us right along with it, I think we're seeing it. I mean, I think we're definitely seeing it, right? At least allow yourself to collect the evidence, to process it, to use intelligence to come to decisions, rather than sort of coming from the position of, I won't even consider that. And it's weird to me because I don't understand that. I've never understood how someone can deny facts, right? What's in front of them. I can understand how people can come to different theories. That I understand. I can understand explanations. But consider everything, right? Consider it all, and consider the evidence without bias. And this is how we learn, right? How we learn and become more intelligent and more understand everything, right? In this case, we're understanding the harmony of ourselves in nature. What I also don't understand is, do people think we can do whatever we want and it's never going to affect the environment? Like, why would someone think that human activity cannot affect the environment? I think sometimes it's when they don't understand what the environment is. They think it's God-given. Because I do notice a lot of times this comes from people who are very, say, religious in the traditional way, and just believe God's going to take care of them. God has made this planet and God's going to do, like, there's this belief that we don't have to be responsible because some other being is going to be responsible for us or is taking care of it, right? And this is the harm of belief when it leads to things that are not connected to reality, to truth. Like, you may have an idea about that, right? Some supernatural entity of your own creation, whatever you pick among the thousands, and then come up with some idea that somehow this planet is here and because of that entity, and that they're going to take care of it. To me, that's like the action of an irresponsible child who expects there to be a parent always there, like watching over what they do, so even when they make a mistake, the parent corrects it. I think you have to be very much aware of what's happening there with the mind when we go down those paths, convincing ourselves of something like that, because it can lead to very irresponsible behavior, where instead it's like, this is our house, right? The planet is our house and we live in it. And just like when you live in your house and you know that it takes a certain amount of activity to keep that house up. Sometimes it can be very frustrating because there can be a lot of activity, right? But you have to take out the garbage, you have to clean surfaces, you can't, otherwise your house could be condemned, if it reaches a certain point, or, torn down because it's not sustainable anymore. So everyone understands the micro ecosystems, right? That within your house, it matters what you do. You must do certain things, paint the house occasionally, replace light bulbs, fix things. You can't just eat and then throw your plates and garbage on the floor. You put them in the right place, you take out the trash. Like, it's so clear because it's so close to people. They can see that in their own house. How can they not see that the earth is like our house in the same way? It's just on a larger scale. We have to take out the trash. We have to be careful what we do, not to, you don't tear off boards of your house and burn them for heat or something without understanding the consequence that has on your house. That, okay, now rain's going to get through your house, and animals, and like, so in the same way, like if we just tear things down on the earth because we want to use them without understanding the consequence of that use, the long-term costs and benefits of every action we take, then this is not intelligence, right? This is not intelligence. We must see the world and our place in it the same as we see how we live our lives every day, and not be ignorant of that connection. That also doesn't mean we can't live our lives. We can find ways to live. Humanity lived on this planet for 3 million, and I'm only saying the Stone Age, right? Humans, I'm sure, went back much further than that, before tool making, before the Stone Age. But even within the age of tool making, the Stone Age, human beings lived in harmony with nature for a very long period of time. Probably, you know, it's sad to say, but one reason there weren't so many humans at that point. There weren't so many humans, and so they could only do so much damage. But even they had to know certain things to survive, even within their own communities. Right? Even a small family living in a cave, and I have no idea how people in the Stone Age lived, but even in that era, they had to take care of their surroundings. They knew they weren't growing food at that point, right? So they weren't planting. There was no agriculture. There were no cities, I don't believe, I mean, that we know of. So a lot of it was just your natural near environment. It made sense totally to them, right? That they had to keep their living area organized in some way. You know, they had certain, I'm sure they had certain rules and certain, you know, they didn't have language, I don't think, at that time. No, I don't believe they would have. So we knew how to live in harmony with nature at that point. We've forgotten it now because we're so far removed from nature. We've lost that relationship with nature that has kept us alive and kept everything else alive on this planet for millions of years. Like, just think about that. The longest period of human history was during that period when we had stone tools. 3 million years. And only within the last 10,000 years has everything else happened. I mean, when you think of that, it would be exponential, be like an exponential curve, or even not even, something that was probably mostly flat over a very long period of time, and then underwent a very sudden transition where things started changing very rapidly and has led to where we are now within just the shortest period of human history. It does make you think, did we take a wrong turn? Right, literally turn, like you could imagine a graph that turns upwards. Like, did we make the wrong turn? Because we were in a sustainable sort of harmonious relationship with nature. This planet was going along. I mean, not that things didn't happen in the past, that dinosaurs came and went, and I mean, there's been many things that have come and gone on this planet. Species go extinct, and this could be humans going extinct, right? We could be witnessing our own extinction that we don't see, right? If we don't pay attention. So we have to go back to this paying attention that I'm always talking about, because it's how we learn. It's how Helen Keller learned, right? Her whole attention, she said, now interesting, whole attention was on what was happening to her through her senses. Now, she only had one sense, one physical sense. Well, I mean, she had taste and other things, but one that was, you know, she was in some sense concentrating. There's a concentration there because she was focusing on what was happening, you know. So she regards it as attention, but you do need to pay attention, right? There is a paying attention. But she says her whole attention was required for her to learn what was going on. And then it clicked. So insight occurs through attention. You know, you pay attention and then it comes, when it comes, right? We don't control when insight comes. That's what's very important to understand here, to see what actually happened. It wasn't a progression, a sequence of events that occurred that clearly led to the outcome. right, like in our normal daily life, through thinking, we plan, because that's what a plan is, right? A plan is a sequence of events that, if you execute them, achieves a certain objective at the end. Nothing like that happened here. You could say the plan was that Anne Sullivan, her teacher, had said, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to sign these things in her hand and I'm going to pour water over it, right? There was that part of the plan, but that could have led nowhere. It could have led somewhere. There was no assurance that taking those activities was going to lead to any insight, but it did help promote it, right? So this is what's interesting. It did, and that type of insight, right, can be promoted by creating the conditions for that insight to arise, but it isn't directly responsible for the insight. And this is similar to what we talked about before when I said all of what we're doing in some ways is like opening the windows of a shack to let the wind in, but we can't control whether the wind comes in or not. The wind may not come in. There's no guarantee at that point. It's like the conditions can be there, right? The conditions are openness, attention, awareness, be aware, silence, not man-made willful silence, but a silence that comes about through paying attention, that when one pays attention, one is naturally silent. And through wisdom, when one understands things, one becomes silent. Because that understanding and that wisdom fosters silence. Because there's an order, right? Things are usually when there's noise, it's disorderly. Noise is sort of disorderly, right? A bunch of people talking in a room, all having their own individual conversations, it leads to noise, right? It's not synchronized, it's not organized. They're all just having their own conversations. But think of a class full of students paying attention to the teacher. They're not all talking and doing their own thing. There's a coordinated silence in that situation, a paying attention that brings about orderliness. You have to have orderliness in a classroom for students to learn. It's necessary. And also, when they're paying attention, it's not like you have to tell a class. Sometimes you do in preschool or in grade school, class, be quiet. I can't tell you the number of times I've had teachers that had to yell to class. I was never one of those kids. Right? I was always the quiet kid that was paying attention. Maybe in the back of the class, maybe sometimes having a side conversation, but rarely. And I wanted to learn. So I was often paying attention to the teacher to see what I could learn. And so paying attention always made sense to me. I guess it never was clear to me how significant it is. That paying attention is the key to everything. The key to understanding yourself, the key to understanding everything. Right? In the same way we pay attention to a teacher in a class to learn, we pay attention to everything, this entire universe, and we learn not from a teacher, but from the universe itself. We learn. Right? That's how everything is learned. But we forget that along the way, I think, and we start listening to people, other authorities, right, that we think know more than us. And we shift from our own learning to learning through another person. And then we lose the ability to learn, to pay attention. Everything becomes just gathering facts, gathering knowledge, instead of that learning from paying attention, which is not accumulation of knowledge. It's not accumulating, it's observing. And it is different. It's different in the same way that when Helen Keller was, in this situation, right, she was not accumulating facts. She was paying attention to hand gestures and the feeling of water, right? But it wasn't like new information. It was the same information. It's just at some point there was a connection. There was an order. At first it was disorderly, right? She was frustrated. She was even angry. I think she broke a mug at one point when she was trying to teach her about a mug. So that wasn't successful at first, right? All these things that happened. And then it was just, I think it was the water that did it, right? She learned from that, and it transitioned from this state of disorder and frustration to order and amazement, right? When that insight occurred, there was a peace, I'm sure, that came over her, that this flash, it was like joyful, right? I'm sure she experienced joy at that connection. And so all these things are related, right? Insight brings joy. Insight brings it's beauty, because all of a sudden there's some order that's observed that was not observed before. I get it, right? What does it mean to get it? It's like when someone has an aha moment and they say, yes, now I get it, right? That's insight. It occurs, there's a moment before you, there's a moment after you get it, and it's not predetermined. It's not, it is very much like watering and fertilizing soil and seeing what grows from that soil without knowing what's even in the soil. Not planting, maybe you plant seeds and then but it's just watering the soil and seeing what blooms from it on its own, not through your effort, right? You don't cause a plant to grow from a seed to a plant. That process is beyond you. But you can set the conditions up for that seed to grow. It doesn't guarantee there's a seed in the soil. It doesn't guarantee it's going to grow. But without those conditions, you can say for sure it won't grow. And I think that's what we're saying too, right? If people just go about their daily lives unchanged, it's like there's no soil for anything to grow. Everything's already occupied. Everything's already taken. There isn't room for something new. There has to be space, right? There has to be space for something new to grow, like in a flower bed. You can't have weeds and you can't have other things in that flower bed. You have to give it space to grow. And in the same way, the conditions for us to learn have to be there. But it doesn't mean we're going to learn. And we don't know what we're going to learn. That's another important factor. It's an unknown. What's known is the past. It's not new. What's unknown is, the only way to see the unknown is to be free from the known. Because as long as we are tied to the known, there is no freedom from the known, and everything that happens is a continuation of the known. Just the known in a slightly different version, a slightly different form. Nothing new is going to happen. We have to set aside the known for the unknown to come. And we can't know what that is. That's another key thing. We can't strive for the unknown because we don't know what it is. If we think we know what it is, it's the known. And this is what most people do, right? They think they know what they're doing. They're practicing something with an intended outcome. They have in their mind what they think is going to happen, what they think it's going to be, and they think if they practice, they will achieve that. That's the known. All that's the known. Nothing new. No new insight there. Right? It's not going to happen that way. I just thought of Vipassana, right? Because there is a meditation where Vipassana is like insight meditation. Right? And so people are aware of these concepts, but again, even that can become, when it becomes mechanical in a process, then it isn't going to lead into anything new. People understand insight. I mean, people have had insight. Insight is not an unknown thing. The act of insight. What is unknown is what insight may bring. Right? Helen Keller had amazing insight. I don't think she had no past awareness of what was going to happen. Right? It came all of a sudden, within a flash, and then her life was never the same again. And there was no going back. Right? These are all things we've said. Like, once you've had insight, there's never a reversal, because it's like the insight is the order. Once you see that order, you can't undo it, It's like now the world makes more sense now. And that order, there's no reversal. Like, once she made the connection between the signs in her hand and what she was feeling, it was like it's like a one-way thing, right? So that's why insight is not like you have it for a moment and then it's gone. It's like a one-way street. You know, that insight changes you. It changes some structure in your brain permanently. Well, as long as that brain exists. And we can say that it causes a change in the brain. I mean, we can speculate. I'm not saying I know that for a fact. But the brain being this mechanism of thought, that when something changes it, it just seems to go hand in hand, that would correspond to a physical change in the structure of the brain. But we don't need to know that, right? We don't need to know that. Helen Keller didn't need to know about the brain to have that insight. It just happened, right? And in the same way, it can just happen to us at any point in time if we don't get in the way of it. We allow things to happen. So I don't know, this is a lot, I guess, to talk about, a lot that we've said. I did want to talk about something, I guess, I don't know how much time we have here, I guess I have to consider that. Where we are here. I like to keep this, well, it's probably about time, but maybe one more thing, which is joy. So I was thinking about this morning as I was leaving the house, and I mean, I just mentioned the joy of insight, right? I mean, we could even say that there's a joy that comes along with insight, that when one has that flash of insight, it's like something opens. How did she describe it? Right? She said it was like, I mean, she was trying to describe the joy that she had at that moment. Right? Well, how did she say? And somehow the mystery of language was revealed. No, she said, suddenly I felt a misty consciousness, as of something forgotten, a thrill of returning thought. And she said, the living word awakened my soul. It's interesting that she uses the word awakened, right? Gave it light, hope, and set it free, right? So she uses the words free, awakened, living word, which I think is interesting, right? Not static, but something that's living. Revealed, mystery of language was revealed to me. You know, not that it's something she sought out, but something that was revealed. A thrill, consciousness even. I mean, it's just interesting. Attention, like all those words are there. And even though words are imperfect, I think they express something that we all can sort of relate to some extent, maybe not to that degree, but there is joy when something is understood. When something fundamental is understood, there is joy, right? And then you want to share that joy, right? That's another thing. Joy brings about like, wow, I've seen something amazing. I want everyone to see something amazing, right? And that leads naturally to compassion, because, you know, if you experience something joyful, it's like you want other people to see that same joy, to have that same whatever joy, right? But joy is an interesting thing, because if you hang on to joy, it becomes desire, right? That if you have a pleasurable experience of some kind, and then like whatever it is, you want to repeat it, you know, that's when our brain comes in and wants to like hang on to things, like, oh, that was great, now I want more of it. You know, that was a great experience, I want more. And that's when trouble begins, because joy is something that when it's there, feel it, experience it, right? But when it's gone, let it go. Because if you try to hold on to it, it leads to suffering, right? This is the same thing that brought you joy can bring you suffering if you want to keep it. You know, you want to hold on to it. And so like you may have had a joyful experience, you know, watching a sunset, and you're like, oh, that's great, I hope I have a sunset tomorrow, right? And then tomorrow it's cloudy and you don't get to see it. Now you're sad because you're not experiencing the joy of yesterday. The joy of yesterday is gone, right? Cannot be returned. That's only a memory you have of that joy. The memory of the joy is not the joy itself. That's the other thing to realize, right? You can have a joyful moment, But that joy is not the words. It's not the memory of that moment. It is in that moment. And when that moment is gone, the joy is gone. This is where we need to understand the impermanence of things. The fact that things come and go, including joy. And it's okay that they come and go, including us. Right? We come and go. And it's okay. Just like joy, things are temporary and change always and can't stay the same. You can't stay in a joyful moment always. It wouldn't make sense. It'd be horrific, actually. Like, it's that balance and the swinging of things that makes life interesting, right? The fact that you have a cloudy day followed by a sunny day makes the sunny day even more joyful when it comes. Right? If all days were sunny, you wouldn't get as much joy out of it as when there's this balance, this swinging around of things, that when joy comes, it can be appreciated in that moment and not held on to, and you're okay with it. Being okay with that, the passing of a joyful moment, right, almost creates another joyful moment, right? The letting go itself is joy, and so there's no sorrow when one is sad that joyful thing is not there anymore. So all of this is kind of related to the fact that it's a little sunny today. And the reason I even thought about talking about joy was I looked out the window this morning. The sun was out a little, still behind clouds, but not as bad, or very bad. Definitely a judgment call there. But, yesterday was a bit gloomy, dark, cloudy, rainy. We had thunderstorms, all this happening. You want to stay inside. Wasn't able to go for an evening walk yesterday because of the rain. I just didn't want to get in the rain at that moment. And today it's sunny. I'm outside. I'm walking. Obviously I have a memory. I remember yesterday, and I remember it being not quite as joyful. But I remember today being joyful. Because I'm in the sun. I enjoy the sun. The heat from the sun. It's a good feeling to be outside walking, to hear the birds and everything. And I do try to do it when I can, even if it's raining, but not always. And this day won't last forever. This time won't last forever. Eventually, I get back in my car. I go back to work. I do what it is. But in this moment, there is joy. Right? And I may look forward to this. I do look forward to my walks. Right? So in that sense, there is a desire element to this. That you just can't deny. Right? There's no pretending of anything. We don't pretend that we don't have desire. We just need to understand desire. Where does it come from? How does it originate? Because in the understanding of it, it has less significance. It's not the dominant factor driving you. I'm not driven by the desire to go for a walk. When the conditions are right, I go for a walk. When the conditions are not right, I don't go for a walk. And it's that simple. Right? And yes, you can feel the brain, right? Because the brain is going to do its thing. The brain is a mechanism. The brain is going to have desire. It's going to rise, right? Because that's its job in some sense, right? It's job, but it's not the job to act on that desire in that way, right? I mean, there's other ways of thinking and being. Observe the desire for what it is, the wanting of something joyful. Okay. Doesn't mean I have to get it. Doesn't mean I have to pursue it. Doesn't mean I have to do anything about it. I can just be aware of desire. When it's there, I'm aware of it. Just like everything else. Pay attention. And in the paying attention, it loses any sort of energy, and maybe it won't be there next time. Or, I don't know. I don't control it. But I can pay attention to what's actually happening. And I think that's important, right? Not to deny yourself joy. Right? We can do that too. We can say anything joyful is evil. Anything that makes me feel good is evil, and somehow I don't want that. That's not a great way of living, because there are many joyful moments in life that are interspersed within many moments we would not consider joyful, and that is life. It's both, the light and the shadow. But the combined, it's life, which is a beautiful thing. Both are there, both are beautiful in their own way, right? So if we want to hold on to one and not the other, it's an imbalance. It's a separation. We can't have one without the other. They go together, right? So the only reason we have joyful moments in life is because there are unjoyful moments in life. So you can't have one without the other. They're both two sides of the same coin. So you see that too. You stop trying to say, well, I want one side of the coin, but not the other side of the coin. You can't have that. That's not how it works, right? So just seeing life for what it is, not trying to make it something different or be something that is always pleasurable or always one way or the other way. That's not what we should do. Just take every moment for what it is, what it has to offer, joyful or otherwise. When it's sunny, it's sunny. When it's cloudy, it's cloudy. Right? There's no reason to strive for one or the other. Maybe you like clouds. I mean, some people like clouds and it's the other way. They don't like the sunshine. They want the darkness and clouds. Okay, whatever. That's also shows the capriciousness of assigning certain things as joyful and certain things as not joyful. That's can be very personal. It can be very subjective. But we don't have to run away from it, right? If there's things you enjoy, I enjoy coffee, tea, walks, sunshine, music, certain types of music. I find all of these joyful, and there's no reason for me to eliminate these things from my life and say somehow they bring, what, sadness? No, it's life. It's called living. So live your life. Don't run away from it, but see the life that you are living. That is, observe, pay attention to the life that you're living. In that very attention, the right way of living will come about. The very attention itself will reveal that, right? Not the way you think it should be or the way you imagine or thought tells you it should be, but just life and living. It's not that hard. We make it hard, right? We make it hard. I would say probably through our 3 million year plus history, there was a lot of joy. There was a lot of hardship. And somehow we are still here, right? Humanity persevered, and we're here now because they were there then. Those were our ancestors who are still in us, right? We are still our ancestors, just like I am still my mother and father and their mother and father. And, there's a continuous chain, right, going back to the Stone Age. And because they struggled and survived, I am now able to enjoy a walk in the sun. So in a way, they're walking in the sun with me, right? They are still a part of me. That's another thing we need to see, right? That our ancestors, our heritage, it's still part of us. We are that continuation of them. And, it's just a recognition of what's the truth, right? I'm not making this up. It's not imaginary. It's true from what we observe. All right, so that feels like enough for today. This was a very enjoyable walk. Another great day to be alive, to be sensitive to everything that's happening, including my own thoughts, to feel sort of the coolness of today. It's still very, very interesting, the changes we go through, right? Every day being different. And I said every day is new, right? Every day is a gift, if you want to think of it that way. But it's just new. Every day has something to offer if you pay attention and see what that day has to offer. Even the cloudiest day, the rainiest day, all have things to offer. But if you become self-centered, you won't see that. Or remain self-centered, I should say. If you're open to things beyond yourself, then there is no problem anymore, right? There's no problem, because you're not, your whole purpose isn't maintaining that self anymore. Like, sure, you maintain the self, but it's not your sole purpose. It's not, the sole thing driving you anymore. There's something else there that understands others, that understands the environment, that it's bigger than you, right? Instead of living in a tiny little groove, you can expand your awareness to encompass everything. And it's a much grander way of living. Okay, so it's 10 o'clock exactly, so I think it's been about an hour. I will hit the button here and say goodbye, and have a wonderful day, and find joy, the joy of living your life today.